Hello, and welcome to the weekend episode of Views of an Outsider, Back to Basics, Part 6. What is a friend? This has been a double-length series dedicated to the idea of getting back to the basics of life. We started out by asking ourselves the very basic question, what is a woman? This led us to the follow-up question, what is a man? These two questions inevitably caused us to ask, what is a spouse? And normally the series would have ended there, but there were still important questions left to ask, so naturally we turned our attention to the next obvious question and asked ourselves, what is a parent? Then we flipped the question around and asked ourselves, what is a son or daughter? And today we ask our final question of the series. Our journey wouldn't be complete without asking ourselves to consider one final query. What is a friend? I personally think that we have gotten way off base about what a real friend is. I would argue that a real friend doesn't lie to you, even when we want them to, because a lie is always harmful in one way or another. And the bare minimum standard for being a friend is that they are supposed to love us enough to not deliberately harm us, even if that is the easier path for them to choose at the time. I think that a real friend is someone who is motivated by a love that is worth enough to drive them to help us see more of the truth within the big picture. But that responsibility can occasionally be an unpleasant task. So, do we really need friends? Are they really that important? Can't we get by just fine without them? And is it worth all of the trouble that it will bring to bother being a friend to someone else? There's an old saying from Ben Franklin that goes like this: a man wrapped up in himself makes a very small bundle. However, these days we are relentlessly encouraged to wrap up our entire world in the most trivial and unfulfilling, not to mention temporary, parts of who we are. And people have found out the hard way that actually following this bad advice makes for some very narrow and hollow lives. Now, you can try to argue that this strategy works for some people if you feel the need to go on the defense. But I tend to doubt the truth of that claim. I think that all of those kinds of protestations are just obligatory empty words, which come automatically out of a very human instinct to justify any choice that we've already made, even if we're not really that happy with it. As human beings, we feel stuck with our choices, so we defend them to the bitter end, even when we are far from satisfied with the results that we've gotten. But either way, whether I'm right about their inner satisfaction or not, the reality remains that most people require a life that consists of something more than just endless navel-gazing. Deep down, most people know that they simply aren't that interesting or mysterious enough to fascinate themselves for the rest of their life, no matter how alluring the idea might be to claim otherwise. In the end, lives wrapped up exclusively in oneself just end up being a performance that no one really buys, least of all you. Secularism insists that you can have a brimming full life by prioritizing the urge to satisfy every fleeting whim that possesses you from one moment to the next, and that doing this will somehow lead you to a meaningful and happy, albeit solo, existence. But all of the available evidence seems to work against this promise. You can argue that this approach to life sounds like it should have worked, but why does that really matter when the fact is that it clearly hasn't? People have listened to this gospel of self-gratification and self-indulgence for decades now, committing to it more fully with each generation that has come along. Many people have based their whole life view around these promises, but even as we all commit to it ever more aggressively, we often find ourselves feeling empty, directionless, and above all, completely hopeless that things will ever get any better. Some people have yet to make the connection between the cause and the effect here, but many of them are waking up to the fact that this whole framework is just fundamentally wrong somehow. Maybe it's time to stop torturing ourselves, trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole, and just admit that this isn't working, so that we can make a fresh start. There are, of course, always going to be a few people who would rather continue going down a path that is making them miserable than to ever admit that they are fallible and took a wrong turn somewhere, or that they don't have all the answers, and that's fine. I mean, I won't personally be making that choice, but other people can if they want to. If saving their pride is really worth the trade-off for them of choosing to remain in a life that makes them unhappy, then so be it. It's their choice. They're free to choose how they want to prioritize things in their own life. But that doesn't mean that we are all obligated to pretend that we find their arguments compelling, or that we really believe that their performance is convincing us. They get to choose how they want to live their own life. No one is going to try and stop them. But the rest of us get to choose for ourselves too. After all, that's what free will is. We are each responsible for making our own choices concerning ourselves. And we have to live with those choices, or else decide to change course at some point. The key is to make a deliberate choice, one that you can actually live with. Other people are free to continue down whatever path they decide to go. No one is going to take away their right to choose for themselves. But most people seem to be completely over the idea of pretending that all choices are equal. They obviously are not. Some choices do lead to better outcomes than other choices do, and they are therefore better choices. This is why a lot of people out there have decided that imitating the people who have made better choices for themselves and have gotten better outcomes as a result is their best chance at achieving those same better outcomes in their own lives. That decision to choose what is clearly better doesn't come from some feeling of moral superiority to others. It's about not wasting our one and only life, repeating the same failed experiment that other people have already tried repeatedly, only to achieve the same subpar results that other people have gotten for our trouble. Someone else may choose to rerun those failed experiments in their own life, and fair enough. That's their choice to make. But we aren't all obligated to do the same thing. And we're not obligated to pretend that choosing that path is the wisest option that is available, just so that we aren't seen as being judgy. Not doing drugs is actually a better choice than doing drugs. Not cheating on the people that you claim to love is actually better than cheating on them. Lovingly raising the children that you have brought into the world is actually better than being a deadbeat parent who neglects them. We all know that these things are true, and yet many of us find ourselves compulsively acting on an instinct to always play devil's advocate anytime someone is honest enough to tell it like it is. That instinct isn't organic. It has been trained into us. But it's not actually judgmental to admit the truth about moral decisions like these, and deep down we all know that they are true, whether we admit it or not. So why can't we just rationally assess two paths honestly, based on where they have led people, and based on the results that they have produced? Honesty is an acceptable metric for choosing how you're going to conduct your own life. Honesty isn't the same thing as having a superiority complex, and it isn't the same thing as being judgmental. It's just what it sounds like. Honesty. You can't assess things accurately unless you assess them honestly. So you can either choose to lie to yourself and get blindsided by life, and then rinse and repeat, or you can choose a better approach. And using honesty as a guide for your own life isn't something that any of us should be bullied into being ashamed of. We have to be honest with ourselves. But we also have to surround ourselves with the kind of people who are capable of being honest with us as well. We all need people in our lives who love us enough to do that for us when we aren't doing a very good job of being honest with ourselves. Every human being has their blind spots. For example, if someone weighed 600 pounds, which of the two people that I'm about to describe is really being their friend? Is it the person who chooses to do the easy thing for themselves? Who repeats the lie that you can be healthy at any size? Or is it the person who does the uncomfortable thing, who says, look, I love you and I want you to continue to be around for a long time, and you won't be if you keep harming yourself in this way. This is going to kill you, and soon. And that would be tragic because you have so much to offer other people. You are valuable, and I want you to believe that and treat yourself accordingly. Let me help you to get some counseling and a healthy eating plan together. You don't have to do this alone. We can shop together to avoid temptation and exercise together to keep each other motivated. I've got your back for as long as you need it because you matter to me. Which of those two people is being the real friend in that situation? Because from where I sit, the liar isn't a good friend, even though that is the route that most people argue for. But most people these days aren't good friends. And bad friends come in a variety of forms. Misery loves company. We all know that. So there will always be people who try to act as though your choice to make a better life for yourself is somehow a personal attack on their value as a human being, since they aren't interested in doing the same thing. In life, you're not going to be able to avoid outraging people like that, and it's essentially a waste of time to try. Most people no longer have enough fuel left over to go on having these pointless arguments with unreasonable, outraged people anymore. If someone is going to be so beyond reason that you're trying to make the best choice that you can for yourself offends their sense of self-worth, then most people have reached a point where it is just not worth their time to endlessly kiss it and try to make it better for that childish person. Especially because it never, ever works. Nothing is ever enough to appease people like that. They are addicted to being offended and outraged. A lot of people have concluded that it's not worth their time, focus, or energy to even try to appease people who are that determined to behave in that way. Not when there are so many more productive, not to mention more enjoyable things that they could be doing with their life instead. But the answer to the problem of avoiding bad and unhelpful friends is not to forgo all friends in favor of going it alone. That might be necessary for a time, but it's a poor life plan. I'm not going to win any popularity points for saying this, but permanently limiting your focus exclusively to yourself results in you living your life in an ever-shrinking, collapsing, black hole of a world that you marked off a long time ago with some very confining borders. Now, you can choose to take all of the disappointments, betrayals, and injustices that you perceive in your life and make them the center of your world if you decide to, but that will only result in your becoming a resentful, envious, bitter, not to mention miserable person. You will pay the price for that choice, not anyone else. And you will ultimately end up alone if you choose that path. After all, no one enjoys being around a miserable person with a list of grievances that is practically tattooed on their forehead. Not even the other people who do the same thing. You won't want to be around you if you let yourself become that kind of person. Some people choose to alternatively center their whole world around satisfying their animal lusts and numbing the dissatisfaction instead of focusing on their grievances. But I doubt that this strategy will make anyone feel any more fulfilled. then the other one will. Because if you treat yourself like a piece of meat and invite other people to do the same thing, then you are probably going to end up feeling like a piece of meat who has spent your life being victimized by the sociopaths who took you up on your offer and used you accordingly. And you aren't going to feel good about yourself after that experience. You're just not. I can't wave a magic wand and change what the results are going to be for you if you retry a thoroughly tested experiment, hoping to get a different result. No one can do that, despite all of the promises out there to do so. You can pretend that things are different than they actually are, but you'll never succeed in making it true, or even in really fooling yourself. And at the end of the day, you're the only audience that matters because only you have to live non-stop with your life. So if you're miserable 24/7, then a convincing performance that is put on for the benefit of other people will be a small consolation to you in your lonely misery. Wouldn't it make more sense to choose a path that actually succeeds in truly making you happy, instead of one that forces you to pretend to be happy out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to somebody else's random doctrines about life? Wouldn't it make more sense to choose friends who don't expect you to lie to them in that way in the first place? Wouldn't it be a relief to be around people that you could be honest with for a change? You could choose to center your life around having fun and never growing up if that sounds appealing to you. You can live like Peter Pan, sleeping in late, playing video games all day, and partying like a 20-year-old every night, if you choose to. I'm certainly not going to track you down and stop you. But we all know that there is nothing that screams loser to everyone around you more loudly than being the oldest guy at a frat party. And shallow friends who probably laugh at you behind your back aren't really going to be there for you in any meaningful way when you need them. There is a time and a season for everything in life, but there is nothing that repulses people more deeply than someone who is still in a shallow phase of life long after they should have moved on. We can't really help it. We just find that completely pathetic and disgusting, whether we say so or not. It's the same reaction that we instinctively have to a much older woman who still tries to dress and act like a teenager. That is not being ageist to admit that our reaction is a negative one. An older woman can still be a stunning beauty. Jane Seymour is a perfect example of that. But even her loveliness would instantly disintegrate if she threw on a push-up bra and a crop top, got some piercings, dyed her hair green, and went clubbing with a bunch of 19-year-olds. And once again, whether you're willing to admit it or not, we all know that this is true. So why should we pretend otherwise? For whose benefit exactly? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of this culture that demands non-stop performances from all of us. I'm a big girl, and I can handle reality. I'm sure that you can too. So why have so many people let their lives disintegrate into a never-ending obligation to put on a non-stop performance for each other? Now, continuing down the paths that I've described is a choice that will always be available to anyone who actually wants them. It's just that most people want more out of their life than that. And if you're one of them, then you have to finally reach a point where you are willing to admit it, even if that upsets some friends that you may actually care about, but who are willing to settle for living in that world of insincere shows when you're not. It's natural to not be sure about how to find something more than that, or even where to start. But most people do know that there is supposed to be more than this, and that they need more than what we're being offered these days. That's why so many people are so miserable in our society, and I feel for them. C.S. Lewis told us, "Hell is locked from the inside," and we all have the key. Holding on to the very things that are limiting your world and making your life a miserable one is behaving just like an addict does. They can't imagine living in what they incorrectly assume will be a more limiting world if it's one without the drugs in it. So they stay enthralled to the very thing that is enslaving them. And by doing that, they are forfeiting a much greater sense of freedom than they can even begin to imagine. It is the same thing when you surround yourselves with faux friends and you're afraid to move on. Sadly, it's much easier to identify what doesn't work in life than what actually does. That's an unavoidable part of the struggle of living and learning and growing. But one thing that can be helpful is to try to look at what has worked for the majority of people in the past. We are communal animals. That's just the way it is. Total isolation is akin to a death sentence for our species. That used to be literally true, and now it's mostly, though not exclusively, a figurative statement, but taken either way, it's still as true as it ever was. We are so communal as a species that we even ritualize voluntarily sharing our food with each other, and we prefer not to eat alone. Does your dog seem to feel the same way when another creature tries to approach his food bowl? It is extremely rare for other species to value companionship so much that they are willing to share their food to the same degree that we do. Sharing food usually results in violence, or at the very least, in the weaker members of the pack having to cower and wait their turn and take whatever is left over. Not convinced? Well, you can also effectively punish the most twisted and hardened criminal elements of a society by putting them in solitary confinement. Like it or not, a need for community is clearly hardwired into us as a species. You can fight against your wiring, but you will lose. So that seems like it would be a big waste of your life, and all to gain nothing in return. We need other people. But we also need to be selective and choose wisely, not indiscriminately. It shouldn't shock anyone to find out that building our lives around the idea of trying to turn our back on the way that we have evolved is a strategy that has completely failed us. It's not surprising that people are looking for a sense of belonging in all of the worst places out there, surely out of desperation to escape the gnawing sense of emptiness that is inside them. After all, no one is guiding them towards a healthier way and a path that leads up out of the suffocating darkness. This is why people have become so involved in politics, even when they never cared about it before. This is why they all want to be keyboard warriors, fighting with complete strangers on the internet on behalf of their team in the culture wars. It's why we've disintegrated into a bunch of tribes who spend most of their time throwing feces at the other tribes. We're trying to deal with this vague problem of dissatisfaction with life by using anything that is available to fill the empty holes inside ourselves. But I think we are beginning to pull out of this tailspin. A few of us are beginning to emerge from the toxic mists. Things will get better. I truly believe that. But as a friend, I'm telling you that you have to make the choice to get healthy. Why is this emptiness that haunts so many people there? And why do we feel it so deeply? The deterioration of the average person's social skills and the severing of the necessary bonds of the communities that used to sustain us has greatly contributed to the overwhelming sense of dissatisfaction that people seem to feel about the world they inhabit. as well as to the hopeless depression and unmanageable levels of anxiety that so many people experience, especially when it comes to any thoughts about their future. For a long time now, psychological literature has verified the clear link between people who focus disproportionately on themselves and people who suffer disproportionately from high levels of depression and anxiety. From a psychological standpoint, these two things are one and the same. The only surprising thing is that anyone would ever have thought that an entire philosophy based on doing this to ourselves would ever succeed at doing anything other than drive people insane. There are some fortunate people in our world who have managed to survive the mass deconstruction of our communities that we all used to live in. And those people just so happen to be doing much better at weathering life's storms than the rest of us are. Orthodox Jewish communities are a perfect example of this. Because of their religion, they all have to live within walking distance of the synagogue. They can't use technology on the Sabbath, including their cars, which means that they all end up living in the same neighborhoods in order to be within walking distance of the synagogue when the Sabbath rolls around. The Sabbath also gives them a break from our ever-present screens, at least for one whole day every week, forcing them to re-engage with each other and with the real world, which is something that is so easy to put off doing without these communal expectations. And because they all live in the same community and are all leading fundamentally similar lives, they are always surrounded by family structures and tight-knit friend groups that make them feel connected in ways that most of us deeply long for. They aren't left adrift in the world like the rest of us are. When one of them loses their job, the rest of the community immediately steps in to bring food and help them look for work that will provide a new source of income. No one in these communities ever has to face their problems alone, and no one is tempted to settle into accepting the demoralizing lot of being a permanent charity case. They aren't accepting charity from some anonymous stranger or from a faceless corporation or government. They know that they are taking resources out of their own neighbors' pockets, and they are therefore motivated to become a contributing member of their community again as soon as possible, which restores their sense of pride in themselves and gives them back a purpose in life to live for. This is a far healthier environment to live in than the alternative. How do I know that? Because we all used to live in similar communities, and things were healthier and happier then. Even the polls show that. Things have only gotten worse for everyone since we abandoned this community-based way of life. We voluntarily gave up the meaningful support system of real friends for empty validation and safe space echo chambers. It is actually dizzying to stop and think about how quickly these once commonplace communities were dismantled. Neighbors used to know each other, and well. They went to church together, their kids played together, and regularly slept over at each other's houses. They went trick-or-treating together and swimming together. Their teenagers rode their bikes all over together and played on sports teams together. Some of the parents worked together or were on the PTA together. They would stop and talk to each other while they were mowing the lawn or getting the mail or washing the car. This was just the normal society that we all used to live in not that long ago. Now it's very easy to live for years in the same place and to never have a single conversation with even one of your neighbors. Many people no longer go to church or participate in any kind of group activity that reinforces the bonds of community. And we wonder why we all feel so alone and isolated. This is not how we were meant to live. That's why. It doesn't work. And we don't have to accept this dissatisfying life for ourselves if we don't want to. People are trying to find that missing sense of community again. It's just too fundamentally necessary for human beings to lead a healthy and satisfying life. Some people want this way of life back badly enough to make the effort to start going to community centers or even to gyms. And they are not going there to work out alone. They are going there to participate in classes or in games and group activities that require them to interact with other people. Why? Because we are hardwired with a deep need for that interaction. We all felt this need keenly during COVID. Being kept completely separated from the rest of mankind was both stifling and depressing for everyone, and it wasn't long before it was driving even the homebodies crazy. Screens were clearly no substitute for the real thing, although we were glad to have anything that kept us connected with each other at that point. Yet, despite their desire to have more, many people are having a very difficult time re-engaging face-to-face with others, even though the COVID restrictions have been gone for years now. Others struggle to feel comfortable with real relationships because they've retreated into their online echo chambers for too long. And the rest have people that they call friends, but who aren't there for them in any way that really matters. And they tell themselves that this has to be better than being alone. Younger people have it tougher than almost anyone else because they have spent all of their formative years in a completely unnatural isolation as a result of both COVID and their overprotective helicopter parents. Many of them have been overindulged for their entire lives, having every toddler-level whim catered to with all the seriousness of a weighty and immediate problem. They've grown up being the audience for some weird stage performance that was put on by the adults in their life, where everything that the child felt became a production that was treated like a life and death priority, no matter how trivial or even selfish it actually was. Every thought that they ever had was treated as if it was profound, valid, and important, and absolutely no pushback was ever given to challenge them or to help them grow, even if the idea that they were pursuing was ridiculous. These non-stop parental performances were carried out in the name of building the child's self-esteem, but it meant that these kids didn't grow up in reality. They grew up in a 24-hour-a-day play, which their parents and teachers put on for them. And now these lost young people exemplify that idea of that addict who clings to what is familiar because they believe that giving it up is going to be a sacrifice, instead of a reality-altering liberation in their experience of life. Sadly, society is continuing to fail these young people as much as their parents initially did. How many young girls are being encouraged to satisfy their need for attention and to feel valuable as a woman by prostituting themselves on OnlyFans? And how many of them continue down that path only because, like most other porn stars, once they've started down that road, they feel trapped into staying on it because the damage has been done and it feels too late to change it. But it never seems to occur to these girls to blame the people who knew better and still encourage them to do this anyway because their own approach to life demanded that everyone pretend that something was empowering even when they knew from experience that it led to anything but freedom and happiness. Why do these girls never blame the other women who lied to them and got them here in the first place? How many of these young girls feel better about themselves after going down this path or more valuable as a human being? I don't mean how many of them say that they feel great about their choices on some podcast that is designed to mock them or in their social media posts. I mean, how many of them actually lay in their beds in the middle of a still night, left alone with their own thoughts, and actually feel like a valuable human being as a result of what they're doing with their lives and their bodies and their souls? do you honestly believe that even one of them feels better about themselves deep down after selling themselves like a commodity? So why are we participating in helping to continue telling these lies to our young people, despite knowing the truth about the damage that they will do to them? Who exactly is that supposed to be helping? Why is our idea of obligation this misplaced? Why do we care more about random ideas than we do about actual people? Why are we voluntarily surrendering our own humanity and our concern for each other to take up a position as a martyr in someone else's cause? And the same goes for young men. They are being told that having goals and ambitions is somehow toxic. They are being told that what they are as men is inherently a bad thing. And at the same time, they are also being told that they are no longer needed in the world and that they have no real role to play in our society anymore. As a result of that constant, unbelievably demoralizing message, young men are generally breaking in one of two directions. One group tries to ape the now taboo concept of masculinity by following the pathetic Andrew Tates of the world. The other group tries to make themselves female adjacent enough to be acceptable, and they end up living lives of repression. Both groups often have a serious addiction to pornography, which pretty much guarantees that they won't ever have a healthy or successful relationship with a woman, which only frustrates them further. And developing substance abuse problems as a coping mechanism is not exactly rare either. Unfortunately, neither is suicide. But true masculinity is not toxic. It is anything but. And I'm tired of watching it be demonized. So are a lot of women out there. True masculinity is both valuable and vitally necessary to women and to society as a whole. And if I'm betraying the sisterhood by saying that, then so be it. I'm more committed to honesty than I am to the ideologies that are held by a loud subset of my gender. And I make no apologies to those bullies for having the priorities that I do. Likewise, men aren't entitled to my respect just because they have an XY chromosome. But if they are truly living up to the responsibilities of what it means to be a man, then they absolutely are entitled to respect for that. There's a big difference between being a boy and being a man. I'm not going to pretend that a boy trapped in a man's body is living up to what it means to be a man. But I'm also not going to pretend that a real man who is working hard to achieve his goals, serving his family and his community, while trying to live his life with honor and dignity is toxic, just because that's the trendy position to take within certain groups that have become pretty toxic themselves. So maybe those groups should spend some time contemplating that whole thing about first remove the plank from your own eye before you worry about the speck of dust in your neighbor's eye. Simply put, whether or not it offends your idea about what makes for a better world, the path that we have been going down is quickly approaching its inevitable dead end. And we all feel it. Most people want to be happy more than they want to be right, although there are exceptions to that rule. But you won't convince people who think like that to change their minds, even for their own sake. So they'll either catch up with the rest of us eventually, or they won't. But you only have one life to live, and you shouldn't waste it on their immature stubbornness. It won't change anything, and it would be insane to let them determine how you are going to live your one and only life. I know of no one that is interested in forcing other people to choose a different path for themselves just because that is what they have decided to do. But most people are desperately searching for a different path for themselves. And that's a search that is too important to ever give up just because it offends some people who are allowing themselves to degenerate into being childish bullies that are pitching a fit in order to control everyone around them when it comes to these subjects. Part of why podcasts have become so popular is not only because podcasts are available for literally any interest that you might have. It's not only because it's such a customizable form of entertainment. I think it's also because watching people engage in real connections through real discussions where people actually listen and share their ideas is something that is clearly meeting a deeply rooted need for a lot of people to a small degree. They want to have that in their own life. People feel silenced and alone. They are suffocating, and they are looking for any thread to grab hold of. But obviously, podcasts alone are not enough to sustain a person. We need something more tangible in our real life as well. Likewise, the truth which people need to eventually come to terms with is that even the most gargantuan government on the planet can't help you with most of the problems in your day-to-day life, no matter how big you make it. They will simply never be able to impact your reality in a truly meaningful way, no matter how much you want them to. It isn't possible. Governments aren't even meant to try to do that. No government has ever been successful at doing that for its people, and a lot of them have tried under a lot of different systems. So stop looking in all of the wrong places and to all of the wrong people for the fundamental things in life. Most of your problems are about your immediate world, and their solutions come from your immediate world too. They come from communities, neighbors, family, and having real friendships. And yes, life's answers also come from seriously contemplating God with an open mind. They come from relationships, and you can't have a relationship with your government, or with a politician that you kind of like, or even with that tiny screen in your hand and the bots on the other side of it. The best thing that any politician can actually do for you is to get out of the way. Empower your local structures by giving them whatever they need to succeed and thrive, and then not interfering any more than is necessary. Think about it. After any natural disaster, it's neighbors and churches and volunteers that help people the most. It's other human beings. It's not the government. I mean, the government has its role during hard times, but do the survivors ever tell stories about the heroism of their government? Even if they truly wanted to, a faceless government can't provide you with a real sense of safety or with meaningful support in the way that the people around you can. And that cap on their potential also limits their power over you, which is probably why so many politicians are actively encouraging people to cut off all of their more meaningful relationships in their life by claiming that they are too much of a burden to bother with. They want you to have nothing better in your life to compare them to. They want you to know of nothing that is more effective than they are. They want you to have nowhere else to turn to except to them, so that you are totally dependent on them, so that you will look to them for everything. That's power. But looking to them will always leave you disappointed because they aren't capable of giving you more than they already do. As human beings, we need both a sense of purpose and a sense of value as a person, which comes from fulfilling that purpose and knowing that we are contributing to the greater good, at least in some small way. We are part of a larger whole. A world that consists exclusively of the self is not even capable of producing either of those things in your life. It's just too empty of a world to provide any real sustenance for you to live on. Now, you can choose to view a statement like that as an insult to your value or to your identity if you want to. Or you can choose to view it as an obvious truth that is simply being pointed out and acknowledge it. It's up to you. It's your happiness that's at stake. But I would point out that no one will ever know if you're being disloyal to their cause by being honest with yourself right now in the safety of your own head. Even the people who do choose to center their entire life around themselves are characterized by this incessant need to have attention from other people as they do it. There are social influencers whose entire shtick centers around being proud of things that don't actually matter. Pride is something that you're supposed to feel about achieving a real accomplishment. When you graduate from school, you have accomplished something, and therefore you feel proud of your achievement. When you serve your country in the military, you survived the rigorous training and have made a contribution to the greater good, and you are therefore proud of those achievements. When you succeed in your career or in building a family, you have actually done something, and therefore you feel a sense of pride about what you have built. When you help someone else, you feel good about yourself. It's just how we're built. But these days, it has become trendy to express the empty claim that we all feel a sense of pride over things that aren't accomplishments at all, over things that are just a fact. Now, to be clear, just because you are not proud of something, that does not mean that you are ashamed of it. There is an entire realm of neutrality that lies between something that you should be ashamed of and something that you should be proud of. For instance, it would be ridiculous for me to say that I am proud of my eye color. There is no accomplishment in that to be proud of. It's just the result of some meaningless genetics. I can like my eye color without being proud of it. It would be the same thing if I said that I was proud of my height. What exactly is there to be proud of? That doesn't mean that if I'm not proud of my height, then by default I'm ashamed of it. It just falls into the realm of unimportant, trivial things that I feel neutral about, as it should. But the world has become full of very childish all-or-nothing games. If I say that my height is not something to be proud of, what some people hear is that I'm saying I should be ashamed of my height. But those are actually not the same statements. When people say that they are proud of sleeping around, I have to admit that the thought that runs through my mind is, why? It's not as though sleeping with someone is an accomplishment. It's not as though this is a difficult and complicated process that few beings ever duplicate, like climbing Mount Everest or something. Literally every organism on the earth, even the most primitive forms of life, manage to do it. So why is that something to be proud of? That's not actually a feeling of pride, and deep down the claim fools no one because of that. That's defiance. What they really mean is that they are not ashamed of sleeping around. To which I can't help but think, okay, who said that you were? They just gave themselves away. The shame came from them, not from me. Their claim is a gut reaction to their own perception that other people will see their behavior as being shameful, so they preemptively declare that what they've done is some admirable virtue instead. They are daring you to disagree with them, which most people don't care enough to do. But their own need to express that they feel a sense of pride in sleeping around, in answer to a question that literally no one is asking them, gives away the obvious reality that they actually feel anything but pride about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't feel the need to comment on it at all, or try to justify it, just like I wouldn't feel any need to justify my eye color or my height. It's the same thing with all of these sexual orientations that are being proclaimed left and right today. We have entire months of the calendar and public parades devoted to people who feel the need to express feeling pride in the fact that they happen to be sexually attracted to this group instead of to that group. But once again, there is no accomplishment in that. We are all attracted to whoever we are attracted to, whether we were born that way or whether it is the result of our environment or both. That doesn't really change the fact that one way or another, it's certainly not an accomplishment to feel a sexual attraction towards someone. Taking pride in that would make no more sense than taking pride in the fact that you prefer brunettes instead of blondes. That would be a ludicrous thing for a person to take pride in. And I'm sorry, but all of these new orientations are totally bogus. They just translate, like so many things today, into look at me, look at me. There is no such thing as an ecosexual. So stop being weird just to get attention. And stop molesting nature. Without its consent, I might add. Can we be serious, please? Enough with this world of non-stop performances that we're all supposed to pretend that we buy. We don't. The performer doesn't either. No one does. So let's just call the whole thing off. A life that is centered exclusively on oneself doesn't leave room for any real accomplishments. It only leaves room for identity, because that's all you have when your whole world is you. And therefore, the only claim to experiencing pride for a person who is living that way is to declare that they feel pride over the facets of their identity. But there is no real pride in that. They only have one well to draw from, and it's a kiddie pool. The sad reality is that there is nothing substantive to be proud of in some random part of your identity that just happened to turn out that way. It is the reason why people without any real accomplishments, or even any real ambitions, feel the biggest need to incessantly declare their baseless pride in themselves, a pride that sadly they've never actually experienced. But they don't have to limit their entire universe to a small puddle that is made up of one person, themselves. The choice isn't between no pride or fake pride. Go out and create the real thing. The incredible truth is that we live on an impossibly unique ball that is capable of sustaining life while spinning through space near a giant ball of radiation that is also whirling through an infinite universe of countless other galaxies. That is the unbelievable truth about our miraculous existence. But what is even more real than that mind-boggling truth is your own small world, the one that you actually live in. That world is made up of the places that you see with your own eyes, the people that you come into physical contact with, the grass that you touch, and the air that you breathe. That is what is real. Truly realizing that is what will enable you to set aside all of the empty barriers that lie between you and the pulsating reality that surrounds you. It is so important to actually remember to regularly take the time to stop and look up at life, because it's incredible, and we've forgotten that. Thomas Sowell said, much of the social history of the Western world over the past 3 decades has involved replacing what worked with what sounded good. In area after area, crime, education, housing, race relations. The situation has gotten worse after the bright new theories were put into operation. The amazing thing is that this history of failure and disaster has neither discouraged the social engineers nor discredited them. This is also true of the people who are recklessly passing out unqualified life advice about how other people can find true happiness, despite the fact that they haven't found it themselves yet. Their personal failure in that area, and usually in every other area too, and even the failures of the people who have followed their bad advice, never seems to translate into them being discredited. It often doesn't even translate into a realization that however good their philosophy may sound, it doesn't work. But I truly do believe that we are on the cusp of seeing that all begin to change. Upper-class feminists didn't generally date the kind of men who were likely to hit them. For the most part, they went out with men who came from upper-class families like their own, and who were raised with better values than that. Or at the very least, those men knew that they would be shunned by their own circle of polite society if they failed to live up to the acceptable standard of behavior towards women. So it was fine and dandy for these women to say that it was offensive to them for men to open doors for women or to carry their bags. It was easy for them to say that women don't need a man to patronize them by offering these gestures of respect because a woman can do everything for herself. Before the women who were in a totally different class in society, who went out with men that didn't necessarily come from good backgrounds, and who wouldn't be shunned in their circles for getting physical with a woman, societal norms, like respecting women enough to go through the ritual of opening the door for them, also served as a reminder that they should restrain one's temper with them as well. So it wasn't the feminists who paid for their luxury beliefs. It was the women who had no say in this change to society's values. That's what having a luxury belief is. It's a belief that you have the luxury of espousing because you don't experience the consequences of it. Someone else does. The same was true of the elite academics who decided that marriage wasn't really necessary and was mostly a societal construct. They declared that divorce had no real downsides for the children. But statistically, we know that most of these academic types live in long-term marriages themselves, while testing out their theory on other people. And although divorce can be the lesser of two evils in certain situations, all of the available statistics prove that this luxury belief, which claims to be consequence-free, is anything but. The charlatan occupation of preaching luxury beliefs to other people has more recent examples too. There was the female social influencer who had built her entire platform on encouraging her female followers to forego relationships with men as a matter of feminist principles, while she hid the fact that she was herself in a serious relationship with a man until news broke of their engagement, after which she rightly lost a lot of the credibility that she had with everyone who had been listening to her up until that point. The body positivity movement is another luxury belief campaign. Once again, this is not an all-or-nothing game. I know of no one who wants to shame anyone for being overweight. But that doesn't mean that we have to praise people for being overweight by calling it brave or by telling them to be proud of being overweight. It certainly doesn't mean that we should lie to people and encourage them to become overweight by telling them that it has no negative consequences on their health. That is just a bald-faced lie. It has just about every kind of health consequence imaginable. And most of the people, not all, but many of the people who back the body positivity movement are themselves not overweight. So they aren't the ones who are going to lead uncomfortable lives in straitjackets made out of their own body. It's not them who is going to die young before their time. It is absolutely a luxury belief for people like this to continue to spread these falsehoods. And one can't help but wonder if, at least on a subconscious level, some of their support when it comes to encouraging other people to be obese isn't just them getting a big chunk of their own competition out of the way. You see this in issue after issue. Celebrities and politicians who support defunding the police and not prosecuting criminals and having open borders, all while they live in gated communities with private security and bodyguards that they can hire to protect them from the results of their own cost-free luxury beliefs. They just continue to insist on inflicting the consequences of their beliefs onto the rest of us because it makes them feel virtuous to think that their beliefs signify that they are our superiors. And if we object to living with the consequences of their virtues, which they themselves are shielded from, then they simply declare that we are all just a bunch of racist, bigoted peasants who need to shut up for the sake of diversity. Most people are tired of all of the ideas out there that sound good in theory, but have led to misery in their own lives. They simply want something that works when it comes to making their world better. And that spells disaster for the people who are in the business of selling pretty ideas that fail to produce pretty results for people. The majority of regular folks have reached a level of desperation where they are beginning to demand more from the elitists who are drunk on the sound of their own voice and who swoon with love at the sight of their own reflection on social media. We are reaching a point where people are willing to come out and say that we don't find their navel-gazing all that profound, or their brain farts as intoxicating as they seem to. And I think that will prove to be a very healthy direction for our society to head in. We need to start being honest about what is contributing positive results to our lives and what isn't. But whether or not society decides to head in a more serious direction, and I think that they will, but either way, this is your life, and you only get to live it once. So don't just blunder through this miraculous opportunity without giving it any serious thought. Don't automatically follow the guy in front of you who has some random bad advice to offer. Actually consider the logic, or lack thereof, behind the things that people are claiming and the choices that you're making. Make deliberate decisions when it comes to the way you build your life, because yes, a life is something that you have to build. It's not something that you just fall into. You don't have to end up wherever you happen to land. That may be how a life starts, but that's not how you want to live it up until the moment that it ends. You can choose one of two paths in life. You can aim ever inward and spiral down internally, or you can aim up and out into the unknown and enjoy the surprises that you find while you're on your adventure. Which of those two options sounds like it contains a wider world of possibilities to you? And who is going to be good company for you to travel with? Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking the like and follow button, because that is what does the trick. And I hope you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.